And we have some surprise guests here as well, so we'll introduce them in a minute. And I'll share my screen with the PowerPoint so we can get started as well. Okay, here we go. All right, welcome. So a few logistical things we wanted to share with you as we go through the presentation today. If you can please mute all your mics. If you join early or late, just please go ahead and mute your mic. And if we do hear noise, we'll try to mute you as well. Any questions throughout the webinar, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can wait until the end and we'll have a Q&A session for anyone who has questions or clarifying questions. And then if you have RSVP today and you're here today, we will be sending you a copy of this presentation so you have it and will be available to you for any counseling services. And as a reminder, we do have two organizations that are collaborating to bring forth this service and start off the series. We wanted to help our ACT students and prospective ACT students and even the community overall with this series. And so we'll be doing these types of workshops every other month. And it'll be with our very own guests from our communities that have different knowledges, different topics that we cover. So today we have our very own Coptic Educational Foundation, and we've been established, as you know, for many, many years, 20 plus years going on, I believe 22 or 23 now. So I'll have Catherine introduce herself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy. And thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to come learn with us today. So as Sandy mentioned, my name is Catherine. I am one of the educational counselors with CEF for the Coptic Educational Foundation, and I've been with the foundation for almost 4 years at this point. A little bit about my background. I was a former assistant director of advising at USC, where I oversaw an office that helped individuals get into graduate school, as well as like early career advising. I've since moved on into the tech sector, working on training programs for professionals, actually early professionals, and even C-suite executive level professionals, educational training programs. But my background really does lie in admissions and advising, and something I'm very passionate about and helping others. In terms of education background, I went to UC Irvine. I double majored in psychology and social ecology, and then I got my master's at UCLA in higher education organizational change. So just very, very passionate about the whole process from, high school to college to graduate school and beyond into your career. So if you ever have any questions, I'm always happy to connect and help advise.
Yes, I love Catherine personally, on a personal level and a professional level, but she has done amazing work with our students at CEF. And so with CEF, I also work with them in another role. A little bit about me. I came when I was in high school as a freshman from Egypt, so that was a different experience for me educationally. And then I went to pursue my bachelor's degree at Cal State Fullerton, where I majored in psychology, but originally I wanted to do bio. And that was really a game changer for me to switch from that mindset to be a physician, from being now a higher education professional. So I've been in higher education now for, I would say, ever since undergrad, just because I've been working in different positions in undergrad. And this would be at least 10 years now, going on. I don't know how many, I haven't counted, but definitely from 2015 or so. And we have had I've had different roles as far as in education, whether it's outreach, counseling, advising, mentorship, and whether it's a community college or a four-year college. And the roles that I serve right now is they're different. It's funny because it's different populations that I serve. One will be focusing on grad students. The other is focusing on high school students and some college students. And then I have one mainly focused on also grad students. So I work for Pepperdine as the senior academic advisor, working with psychology, MFT or psychology students. And then I work with CF with high school students and college students. And then I work with ACTS as their admissions rep for their graduate school of theology. So different roles, but happy to give back to the Coptic community. And hopefully this presentation gives you a lot of knowledge and a head start into your career planning. So I'll hand it back to Catherine here to get us started.
Thank you, Sandy.
There you
Did
go.
we end up getting the poll results? Okay, yeah, this is super helpful. So young professionals, recent grads, and some of you are working professionals. So I imagine a couple of years into your career. Okay, excellent. All right. Okay, so just to get us started in terms of what we'll be discussing, we'll very quickly touch on what a CV is versus a resume. We'll talk about some resume writing tips, as well as the cover letter and interview tips. We won't necessarily cover like applying to jobs per se, like the process of applying to jobs or the use of LinkedIn, because my understanding is looks like all of you might have a separate session just focused and catered on that, which is great. I think these two will complement each other very well. But with that, we can go ahead and get started on the next slide. All right, so writing resumes. So the importance of resumes, you've probably all heard of them, right? Resumes are extremely important in helping someone identify whether or not you're a good fit for the job, right? Based off your resume, people will make a very um, decisions, heavy decisions, right? Whether or not they want to interview you or they're going to pass on your resume. So with that being said, it's extremely important to be very methodical and thoughtful with what you write on your resume and to ensure that you do stand out as a good candidate for whatever role you're applying to. We can go on to the next slide. So just very high level, I'll touch on what CVs are because sometimes I get the question, should I be submitting a resume? Should I be submitting a curriculum vitae or a CV? And what is the difference, right? So if any of you are at all exploring or even considering, getting a PhD, for instance, that is really when you want to write a CV. So a CV is going to capture your academic background, even your academic professional experience. So if you've conducted research, if you've been a published author on certain works, if you've had conference presentations related to that academic work. And then in addition to that, you would include your professional experience. So typically CVs tend to be on average anywhere from like 2 to 5 pages. It really kind of depends how far along you are in that space within academia. But if you are in particular applying to a job outside of academia, so maybe not a professor role or applying for like a PhD program, you would rely on a resume and not a CV. So with that in mind, we will really just focus in on resumes. But if any of you are interested on or talking further about a CV individually, if that case applies to you, happy to speak with you further about that. So I kind of mentioned this already, but resumes are meant to be brief, right? In comparison to a CV, we're looking at a one-page snapshot of everything about you, everything we need to know, and why you would be a good fit for the role that you're applying to. So back to the idea of being very methodical and thoughtful of what you include, you really should only include items that match the job. So, as you can imagine, reading the job description in depth and fully understanding what the job entails is going to be critical to your ability to kind of get that job and or at least get an interview, right? We can go to the next one. All right, so resumes. Resumes are really designed, again, to make a good first impression, right? The biggest thing that I tend to see a lot of people do, and I think it's a big mistake, is they think they have one perfect resume and they can send it out to any and every job. And the reality is, every single job has different nuances to it, even if the title is the same, right? Oftentimes, the specific work you'll be doing from company to company may vary, right? So you want to make sure you do read that. And with that being said, you want to make sure that you highlight those specific experiences and skills onto your resume. and really actually remove anything that isn't relevant. Oh, can we go back? Sorry. There. Yeah. And really just remove anything that is not relevant. Oftentimes, I see people get very hung on to a certain experience, even though it's been a couple years. And my advice there is if it really doesn't align with the job in any way, it's probably best to leave it, especially if it was something that you've done years and years and years ago, right? Um, Whereas maybe you've been at your current role for a more lengthier time, you want to definitely expand on what you've done there. Um, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about this too, but focusing on your contributions and your accomplishments and not necessarily the duties or the day-to-day tasks that you've done, right? Um, Oftentimes companies, they want to hire the best, right? They want to hire someone who's going to come in and really contribute and make a difference, right? Whether that be from leading very important projects, generating a bunch of revenue, whatever roles you're looking for, right? So just saying that, maybe you managed day-to-day tasks of responding to a lot of emails. That's important, right? But what is the contribution there, right? Did you find an automation tool to kind of help reduce the amount of time we've spent responding to those emails, right? That is a contribution. Um, and then, like I said, no one size fits all. In fact, I would say if you are on the job hunt, you should probably have multiple versions of your resume as it aligns with the specific role. And then, lastly, like fun fact, a kind of scary fact maybe, but on average, your resume only gets a quick glance, a couple of seconds, especially after it's even gone through like a system where they may filter you out. So, as you can imagine, someone who's reading your resume isn't going to spend a lot of time and they're looking for keywords, right? Keywords to kind of excite them to say, okay, let me give this a little more thought. And if those words aren't included, that could definitely result in your resume not being selected, right? So yes, preparation is key. Preparing for your job search is, I'd say sometimes even looking for a job is like a full-time job, right? It is not something that takes a little bit of time. It definitely takes a lot of time, a lot of thinking, a lot of preparation. So knowing what to write and what to include is extremely important. Can go next. All right, so I'm going to break down these specific sections of what we typically see in a resume further, but just to kind of give you a snapshot here, your contact information should be at the top. Your skills oftentimes may be at the top or towards the bottom of your resume. Your experience really is what is going to take up the majority of your resume or the bulk of it. And then your educational experience, depending where you are in your career. If you're an early professional, it will probably live on the top of your resume. If you've been in the industry for, maybe 7, 10+ years, your education could actually live towards the bottom of your resume. But in the next slide, we'll go ahead and break this down a little further and give some examples. All right. I see a great question that I'm going to get to when we talk about the work experience. I think that's an awesome question. Um, all right, so your contact information should be very general information. So your name at the very top, ideally bolded. Some people like to use all caps. And then beneath that should be your email address, right? Because that's oftentimes how they contact you, your phone number, because that could be another way in which they contact you. Um, your location, if you want to include this, I think it could be helpful, especially if you're looking for an in-person role, right? And if you are looking for something in Los Angeles, you may want to say you're located in Los Angeles, California. Um, and then LinkedIn link. I hope you all have one. If you do not have one, definitely make one. And again, I know there's a whole series or a whole session on that, so I'm sure you'll get more in depth on that. But including that is oftentimes super helpful for the recruiter to just take a quick look at your LinkedIn and maybe learn a little bit more about your own background, especially because sometimes, again, a resume is typically one page for my early professionals. And within one page, you can't always fill everything you want, but sometimes your LinkedIn can reflect additional things that you've done, and that can be helpful for the recruiter as well. So here you'll see you'll see two different examples. We've just kind of taken some snapshots of what these examples may look like. As you can see, a very neutral standing font, right? You don't want to get really fancy with like cursive fonts and fonts that could be difficult to read, because it could be difficult to read for the recruiter, but more importantly, it could be difficult for the system to read it. Um, so that's one thing to note. And then of course, there are different ways in which you can kind of separate it. Um, I saw a question about what if I don't have a lot of stuff to put on my resume? Well, here's a little tip here. If you're trying to fill a little more space, this second example, Joe Job Scan, could be a nice way, right? You're adding like an additional line, kind of separating information out. So that's one way in which you can also add a little more info. And the one thing also, oh, sorry, Sandy. The last thing I'll add here too is you want to separate each of these items either through a like a divider, like what you see on both of these, or perhaps like a bullet in the middle or some sort, just to really allow for the person to read it easily, as well as those automated systems to kind of break down that information. All right, so skills. So as I mentioned, skills, some people like to have it kind of live at the top, more towards the top of their resume. Others tend to put it towards the bottom. I think if you're an early professional, towards the bottom is probably the best place to put it. And the skills in particular, your skills will range, your skills will vary. I have an example here. Obviously, this is someone who has a like computer science background, as you can tell. But of course, this will vary depending on your own background. Just to give some examples, so maybe you have a psychology background, maybe you've used tools like SPSS or R, or maybe you've used other different Microsoft Office Suite, Google Suite, right? Things like that. For those of you perhaps with like an engineering, like a civil engineering or mechanical engineering background, there might be other different like languages that you may know how to use. If you have like a legal background, there may be like legal softwares that you know how to use, right? So it's going to vary from person to person depending on what your background is. But essentially, your skills can be anything that includes like programming languages, any tools, as well as languages. So if you speak Arabic, right, that's something that you can include. What I always suggest though is putting your proficiency level, right? Because if you speak Arabic conversationally, but you can't read or write, you do not want to say you're fluent, right? Because you never know, on the job, they might say, all right, here's something to read. And if you can't read it, that's going to be an issue, right? Um, so something, and same thing too. I know some people learn other languages very high level. Just be very honest about that, so you don't find yourself in a situation where they're relying on you for something, and you're not actually equipped to handle that. But really, your skills again can vary. I will say too, for my more recent grads too, you can also put qualities. Some individuals like to put qualities, so like um, things like a teamwork, a team player, you can start with that, especially maybe in your first year, you just graduated. But as time goes on, your skills will develop, especially at the organizations that you're working at. You'll be exposed to different tools like Zoom and, um, you know, whatever it may be. But just some things to kind of keep in mind. Oh, actually, and one more thing, sorry. Um, for those of you that are in like college or recent grads too, or maybe you've just taken some like career assessments and you know specific things about your personality, like there's something called a Strengths Finder. You could also list your that as like a quality, and you could list it as, maybe you're futuristic and you're an activator. These are like things from StrengthsFinder, but those could also go under skills, is what I'd say. Because again, it's giving us a little more glimpse of like who you are and what you can bring. All right. So the experience is the part that is going to take up the majority of your resume. And this is one that is going to that again, depending where you're at in your career too, is going to look different. So for those of you maybe that are just graduated from college, early career, you could still include some of your volunteer work. Your internships are also welcome here, right? So those are things that you can include here if you don't have a like actual work experience, right? For those of you that maybe have had a job or two, or later on in your career, this is where the majority and the bulk of your resume is going to take place, right? So first thing to note is reverse chronological order. So that essentially means the most recent experience at the very top, and then the last experience that you had towards the bottom, right? Because your reader is going to read that from top to bottom. So you want to make it easy for them to understand what you've recently done. You can also divide the section. So I've seen work experience, I've seen a non-related work experience, or like volunteer experience. Some people like to divide those sections up too, and that's fair. That also kind of, for anyone that needs a little more space, if you divide work experience as one, as well as volunteer experience or internship experience, that could add a little more depth to the resume if you need that. But you'll see as you move on in your career, you're gonna want to have more space than not, right? Especially on one page. And then 2 to 3 bullet points is ideal for most roles. If you've been at a role for a handful of years, I hope you have at least 4 to 5 bullet points, maybe even more, depending on how much you've done in that role. But it will vary, especially, the duration that you've been in each single role. Now, with your bullet points in particular, you want to make sure you start off with action verbs, right? As you could see in this example, developed, collaborated, managed, right? Assisted. So these are action. Right away, we're starting with an action that this is what they did, and then they move on and explain what it was exactly. And this example also does a good job of, for instance, implemented SEO strategies resulting in a 23% increase in website traffic and improved search engine rankings. That's a huge accomplishment and contribution, right? So now we're learning, maybe we're not learning exactly like what he did to get there, but we learn what the accomplishment was. And that always stands out way more than, I monitored website traffic, right? Which I see a lot with my early career. So you want to also kind of think quantitatively, like what your impact has been. All right, education. So this part, again, because I wasn't sure where most of you were at. So for my early professionals, just graduated, your education really should live at the top of your resume. But for those of you, again, that maybe you've had a lot more work experience, you can put that towards the bottom if you'd like. Because you'll see as your work experience gets longer and longer, most jobs actually focus way more and care way more about your skills and your actual educational background. But with that being said, your education, of course, is extremely important, and you want to dedicate space to it. So with education, I have 2 examples here, but typically what we encourage you to include is the school name, the degree obtained. So was it a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts, a master's, right? What exactly did you study? And then you could include the graduation date. I would say for my young folks, I know a lot of students like to include graduation date, which makes a lot of sense. I think what I tend to see is those further along in their career tend to actually remove that, just because from what I hear, sometimes it could age you, right? There's like age bias in some recruitment strategies. So sometimes that can do that. And with that being said, it is totally optional. I would say the graduation date is totally optional to you. I know some early grads too will also include like the time they were in a certain university. So from 2020 to 2024, if you want to do that, you can, or you can just say June 2024. And that's when you obtained your degree. As you can see in the second example here, we have expected in June 2019. So you could think of that individual as maybe it's like May 2019, right, that they're applying. So they're expecting to get their degree then. So that would apply for my college students. Also, for those of you in college and also looking to add more to your resume, you could include relevant coursework, right? So for instance, maybe you're applying to like a computer science job or a software engineering job. Maybe it would make sense for you to list all the relevant courses that you've taken that align with that job, right? I'm not saying we want your entire transcript, but we definitely want maybe like 2 or 3 classes to help us understand what your skills are, right? And then, of course, a humble brag of, if you've been an honor student or on the dean's honor list, definitely worth including as well. All right. Now, this section that I'm going to mention is completely optional. I know plenty of people that use it, and I know plenty of people that don't. So this is what's called your a summary. Sometimes some folks will call it like an objective, but it's a little different in the sense that your summary can be viewed as an elevator pitch, right? So if a recruiter were to read your resume, if they just want to get the highlights of who you are, they can do so by reading that quick summary, which usually is just like 2 to 3 lines at most on your resume. So again, for those of you looking to add to your resume, maybe you don't have a lot to add right now, this could be something worth adding. Right, and then there you go. So again, this section is totally optional, but if you choose to do it, there are a bunch of things you can include in your summary. And in addition to that, there are other sections that I'll talk about in a second. But your summary is, like I said, different than an objective statement and really is meant to kind of highlight your transferable skills, right? Especially if you're looking to do a career transition or just in general, right? It should be really relevant and have a clear purpose. Like why should I hire you, right? If I'm a recruiter or just someone like picking you out of a number of candidates. So here's a quick summary of someone who is applying to a Salesforce role. And Salesforce is a tool or technology. You've probably heard of the large company Salesforce, but I'll just kind of read it out loud to give you an idea of what a summary could look like. So a certified Salesforce administrator with strong and reliable data analytics experience. Recognized for exceeding expectations in a fast-paced environment with a high degree of detail and positivity. Dedicated customer service expert with experience using strategic decision making to improve business performance and client satisfaction. Effective problem solver skilled in using critical thinking, communication, and time management skills to tackle complex problems. Wow, right? I think we got a pretty nice snapshot of who this individual is, right? They talked about their skills, high degree attention to detail, right? Positive. Their technical background, data analytics experience. They're Salesforce administrator, which means they have a certificate in Salesforce. They have background or experience in customer service, right? And also more skills of being a strategic thinker, critical thinker, strong communication. Drives business performance to, for client satisfaction. So, wow, maybe this person is applying for like a customer success role or anything like that, right? And it makes sense just given what they've shared. So, something to think about, especially if you want to add a little more to your resume. In addition to this, I don't have an example here, but just want to add to this projects, especially for my individuals still in college, or even those of you, maybe you've been in your career for a couple years. If you have like particular projects that you're extremely proud of and align with the role that you're applying to, definitely add it in. In fact, add a separate section that's called projects and list the project name. Maybe you were awarded for it. If so, where was that award given, right? For like what conference or whatever it may be. And then you could also probably include like a very short description of what the project is, right? Especially if it's something like very technical, to help individuals understand your skill set. And then lastly, this one's really more so for my college students, but like your activities or interests. I'll also see this sometimes for individuals in the legal field, but you could just kind of highlight like your interests, like who you are as a person, or your hobbies. I've seen some folks say, soccer, baking, things like that. Again, this is more, I think, for my college students and for those in the legal field, because I know that's actually highly encouraged, but in other industries, maybe not so much. All right. So yes, HR departments get a lot of resumes, especially now, right? I know a lot more people are applying for less jobs than there were before. So as you can imagine, they have a lot of resumes to get through. And with that, they oftentimes, I've heard for some positions, on average, about 200 resumes per position. I will say with the larger, like major companies, Fortune 500 companies, it could expect a lot more than that. But as you can imagine, you want to be able to stand out. One tip that I might suggest is if you are on your job search journey, and you do use LinkedIn, if you can identify the recruiter maybe sometimes on LinkedIn and reach out to them personally and let them know, again, a very quick summary of you letting them know you applied to the role and maybe even attaching your resume, that could very well sometimes kind of help push you to the top. If not push you to the top, at least you got the attention of the recruiter. They might review it, and if they think you're a good fit, they might move you along. I'll say I've definitely benefited from that approach many times. I've got a lot of interviews that way, so that's why I recommend it. But I do know it does depend on the company, but it never hurts to try. That's what I always say, at least try. Cast a wide net, see what you get. All right. Okay. So some top resume mistakes. Real quick, yeah, like we say this all the time. Spelling, grammar, misalignment, meaning like they're just like not aligned properly. Like one date is indented this way and another date's indented that way. Those are just such silly mistakes that you don't want to have on your resume. So be sure that everything is perfectly aligned, spelling and grammar is right. If sometimes when you look at the same thing over and over again, it looks right to you. If you need someone else to look at it, definitely get someone else's fresh eyes on it. They might be able to identify things that you can't see, but don't let this happen to you because it's something that you have maximum control over. So be sure to review and edit and revise before submitting, because once it's there, it is there, right? They got it. All right. So some bullet point best practices here. As you're writing your bullet points, right? Sometimes I understand that can be a very tough part for some folks, right? Like, what do I write? How do I write it? So just a couple best practices is use formal fonts. I know I mentioned this earlier, but stick with the classic fonts. You can do Times New Roman, Garamond, Calibri, Arial, like use very formal fonts. No need to get fancy with it. This is a resume, not a advertisement, right? So also with that, with bullet points, there is no need for periods. They are not complete sentences, so no periods. And then next is don't use personal pronouns like I, my, we did this, I did this. Like really, there should be no need for that because you're starting with an action verb, right? And at the end of the day, a resume is about you. So by default, we already know that this is you. So no need to include those. And then use consistent verb tense. What I mean by this is if it was a past role, it should end in ed, right? Collaborated, right? If it's a current role that you're in, collaborate with, right? So I see this happen way more than I'd like to see, but verb tense matters, right? Just the way I see it is if I'm reading a resume and everything's in past tense and you're still currently in that role, one of two things is going to hit my mind. One, maybe you've left the role since and maybe you just didn't update your resume, or it was a careless mistake. Either way, they're not good looks, right? So don't be a victim of that, and making sure that your verb tenses are looking good. And then it's okay. So sometimes I like the whole view of like one line, one line bullet points. But sometimes you just have so much to say and you need 2 lines, and that's okay, right? And what I'd say is if you're going to use the 2 lines, use as much of the 2 lines as possible. But if you have like one little word that's hanging, I don't know, is there maybe a filler word that you have in that line that you can remove, right? These are little things that you just want to be as clear cut as possible and make it nice and easy for them to read. I already mentioned this, but using action verbs, always start with an action verb, right? And really just avoid those passive verbs, right? Worked for, responsible for. They're much, much better words to use. And if you ever have questions, happy to talk about it. But again, also like you can just easily Google better words like synonyms for responsible for, right? Maybe managed, right? Instead of responsible for, things like that. And then this is a good one. Lastly is list the most relevant or impressive bullet point first. Why? We read top to bottom, right? If you catch my attention at the very beginning, I'm going to continue to read. If the first bullet point is, I don't know if I'm going to continue reading, right? And remember, on average, 6 seconds, it's not a lot of time. So with that, definitely include your most impressive accomplishment towards the top, even if maybe it's not something that you're actively working on anymore, like it was a big accomplishment or big project. Even again, if you're not working on it, it's still something worth putting at the top, because that is work that you've done in that role, and that's important. Okay, next. All right. I kept saying this, but a lot of companies use software that actually evaluates your skills electronically and sometimes spits out a percentage match to the employer. So, based off your resume and based off the job description, it may spit out a percentage. And if you don't meet a certain percentage, it can sometimes mean automatically they just reject your application. And I've seen this happen to individuals that literally do the exact same work as that job that they're applying to, but because they didn't use keywords, because they didn't update their resume to reflect the job that they're applying to, they get denied, right? So don't let that be you. And the way to avoid that is making sure that you personalize every single resume to the job that you're applying to. Um, and again, ensuring that keywords, right, match the description. You don't you don't necessarily want to like reword everything to be just like the job, right? Because I think my understanding is I do think some recruiters can kind of pick up on that. But you want to show at least how related the things you have done are to the current role that you're applying to. All right. Strong bullet points. So um one way to think about these bullet points, because again, I know it's a pain point for many people, is think about the what, the how, the why, and how much. Okay. So what meaning what did you do? What was the context? Right? How did you do it? What tools, what processes did you use? Why? Why did you do it? What was the purpose of that result? And how much, meaning, can you quantify the results, right? We love to see numbers typically on resumes because that is something that's measurable, right? That's something that there's evidence to that. Um, so in some cases, just on the right side here, you'll see um, making your contact information more prominent at the top, I think is going to be super important. Use bullet points for better readability. I've seen sometimes people like to put like paragraphs for every single role they've done. And I don't think that's a really efficient way to help someone who's going to scan through this document, all those bullet points. And then, yeah, typically, maybe you can avoid vague terms like detail oriented or hard worker. I think it's fair though for my early grads and, just graduating from college as listing that as a quality though. I do think that is fair. Um, all right, but in the next slide, actually, I'll show you an example of what this actually looks like in practice. So here's how you can build a strong bullet point. So what, maybe someone has built a data visualization. How did they do it? They use Tableau. And why? To determine client unsubscribe rate. And how much data, or how much? In this instance, they had 3,000 rows of data. So one way that we can kind of convert this to is built data visualization incorporating over 3,000 rows of client information using Tableau, allowing key stakeholders to make crucial marketing decisions based on rate of client email unsubscribes. Now, I don't know what job this particular person is applying to, but I imagine that job in the description maybe has something about key stakeholders, right? Maybe marketing, client information. Maybe the word client pops up a lot in that job role, right? And data. So in this instance, this is a pretty strong bullet point because it captures the what, how, why, how much, and it is also pulling from some of the keywords of the job description, like key stakeholders. So this is what would actually make a very strong bullet point. I think one way someone else could write this that wouldn't be as strong is built data visualization to track email and subscribes. Not very eventful, not super exciting, no quantitative figure, right? So this is a very strong bullet point. All right. So the hardest thing about writing resumes is having to be picky, to be honest, especially for those of you that have a couple years under your belt in different roles. But be sure just to be methodical and really pick the pieces that align with the role. I cannot stress that enough, and I will probably continue to say that. But just something to keep in mind. Really read those job descriptions before you submit your resume. And with that, oh, you want? I'll pass it over to you, Sandy. Thank you all.
Thank you, Catherine. Awesome. We do have a fun little video here. This is the short one to complement what Catherine was mentioning here. Let's see.
If there were 3 things I would tell a candidate to do to their resume to stand out in today's job market, it would be this. It is not the candidate that is the most qualified that actually gets called in for an interview. It's a candidate that's able to demonstrate through their resume that they are able to fit what the role is looking for. And so I want to share with you 3 simple and easy hacks that you can do to your resume today to stand out in the eye of the employer or recruiter and actually get the interview. Let's get started. Number 1, make sure that you add headline to the top of your resume. Number 2, ensure that you add accents like bolding, italics, and color, so that you can highlight important information in your resume that you want the recruiter or employer to see. And last but not least, make sure that you add your LinkedIn URL to the top of your resume and link it directly to your profile so that the employer can learn more about you through your online presence. If there were 3 things.
Okay. We'd like to kindly remind you, if you are unmuted, to please mute your mics. Thank you. All right, I'm going to return back to the slides if I can here. There we go. All right. So the next segment here of the webinar is cover letters. So we talked about resumes, and cover letters are often required by employers to actually complement your resumes. So we have another short video here to get us started off with cover letters.
This is my resume, and here's its best friend, the one-page cover letter, aka its wingman. Together they work wonders, because what the cover letter does is set up the resume by highlighting what makes you a great fit for the job. It shows your personality with 3 concise paragraphs that should be readable in around 10 seconds or less. So, how do you write a cover letter? Let me walk you through one. Literally. Let's say you're applying for an engineer job. Don't forget your header: date, name, address, contact info, all that jazz. Kick it off with a greeting to address the hiring manager. If you can, find out their name. If you can't, stick with this. The attention getter, the opening paragraph. Introduce yourself and enthusiastically tell the employer why you're applying for the job. Include why you're excited and how the job lines up with your career goals. Avoid sounding formulaic by adding keywords from the job posting. The middle paragraph. Dig into your most relevant experience and talk about the specific qualifications and skills that make you the perfect candidate. Oh, and feel free to pause and read when you need to. I've only got so long. Where was I? Right. Make connections between your previous accomplishments. Employers will likely have read your resume already, so avoid repeating the bullet points. Instead, deeply illustrate those highlights. To close the curtain, thank the employer. You can also make any clarifications, for example, any major gaps in employment history. Then, provide a complimentary close and signature that's friendly yet formal, followed by your name. Well, I think that's everything. Remember that the smallest...
All right. So that just gives you a brief overview of what the cover letter does.
Move.
Oh, not here, sorry. Okay. So if you think about the 3 C's, that's going to help you remember what you really need to focus on when you are writing a cover letter. And it should be not more than 1 page. I will say that. And this is actually an opportunity for those of you who are recent grads and technically working professionals. If, let's say, there's a career change and the resume would not really reflect your new goals or the career change that you're about to do, that's a good way to explain, okay, this is what my resume shows, but here's what I actually want to pursue. So that could be a way if you have a career change, or if there's a gap and you want to kind of address that gap in your career. Let's say you've been working and something happened medically, or you had to pay attention to other family needs, and you want to address, why you were out and now you're looking for another job. So that could be where you can address that in the cover letter. So these are examples of where the cover letter complements most of these resumes. I know we like to take the easy way out and have the resume, oh, done. I don't want to submit a cover letter. I don't like writing. But there are so many ways now to give you support to help review the cover letter and help you with your grammar skills, or just in general how you write. And actually CEF does have that counseling support to help you with resume writing and whatnot. And so if we're looking back at the 3 C's, the concise is going back to having it as 1 page. So 3 to 4 paragraphs is no longer than that. And as you saw in the video, each paragraph serves a purpose. The clear, concise, those two kind of go together because you want to make it simple as possible for them to understand your intentions behind applying for their job. And it's also convincing. That's the last C. I want it to be genuine. I wanted to know the story behind the person behind this paper. Because remember the types of jobs that you're applying for, like Catherine was saying, many people are applying for depending on the industry that you're in. I've applied for jobs that hundreds and 200 and 300 of people are applying for. Then I applied for jobs that maybe 50 people applied for. So there's just different positions that are dependent on the entry that you're entering, if it's entry level or mid-level or senior level, that will depend on what you should be writing and talking about. Going into the format of the cover letter, so in your opening paragraph, it is as if you're writing an essay, when you want to capture my attention. And so that's typically when you're talking about, I have interest in your so-and-so company and this specific role and this specific department. And you can mention a little bit about yourself in that process too. In the first paragraph, in my cover letter, I like to talk about my degrees, specifically to highlight what they're looking for. In education, they tend to look for what kind of degrees that we have, because that complements the types of positions that we apply for. But if someone is applying for engineering, that might not matter as much as putting their degrees, but they can put something such as their coursework, or it could be something that they did, like a project they were part of, that could capture someone's attention. And you can say that as part of the opening statement. And then going into the body of the letter, you have another 2 paragraphs or so that you can talk more about your experiences in depth. So that's when you look in the job description and compare it to what you have in your resume, and try to highlight what you have in your resume, and try to see if you can use some of the vocab or the verbs that they use in the job description to highlight your experiences. That way, if there is a scanner, like Catherine is saying, it does capture those vocabs, and it will capture your cover letter and resume as a match. And so that's where you want to be smart about using that job description to your cover letter and resume as that foundation. And then your closing statement. That's where the video highlighted a thank you statement. You can definitely say thank you for your consideration in the very basic statement of thank you. But right before that, you can actually talk more about your purpose, your value, how it aligns with their mission. They like to see that a lot. And for me, purpose, on my cover letter, I do have kind of my motto, as you say. And so I take that and then I see how that can align with the mission of the school. And another big thing that I will mention, since most of you are working professionals, it is smart to put the institution's name throughout the cover letter, and even their mission. You can highlight some of their vocab, that would also help capture their attention, that you've actually went and researched their mission. So that's the cover letters and kind of a little in a nutshell. I know there's a few slides about that, but just to give you an understanding, the cover letter is really an interview, but on paper. So for me to get to know you behind a resume. And going into the interview process, if you have the chance to get an interview, because I know it is a competitive process nowadays to even get invited for an interview, because they go through those resumes very quickly and they only scan a few to interview. So there's a few different steps in an interview process. You might have it as like a phone screening process, or someone who's going through a funneling process. So they are given a set of questions and they say, well, we like these 20 individuals, but we have these limitations and we want to know if these 20 individuals are okay with these limitations. Can you phone screen them? And once they phone screen them, that 20 goes to potentially 7 or 8. So those 7 or 8 are the ones who potentially get interviewed and invited to come on campus. So it gets funneled, even though the 20 that they wanted were eligible to be candidates for interviews, but those limitations added on. And limitations like, for example, the pay is not high enough, or it's requiring you to be in person all 5 days versus the hybrid schedule. Or you might not have a supervisor the minute you're hired. So there's a lot more responsibility on you. So there's different limitations that you might be exposed to when they do the phone screening. And it's up to you to accept or deny the minute they let you know you can move forward. So as far as the purpose of interviews, I have here in the graph the different types of purpose or reasons for someone to want to interview you. The biggest one is to highlight your accomplishments and your skills and understand, why do we want you at our company? What have you done previously at your other companies, or even let's say you're a recent graduate, what have you done in your graduate at your graduate school, maybe projects or other positions that you had, like internships, that helped you get to this level. And the biggest thing for them too is to see if there's a fit. As much as they're interviewing you, you're also going to interview them. So the fit goes both ways. I want to see if your personality is going to fit with the population that you're going to serve and the team that you're going to work with. So going to the interview life cycle, this kind of the step-by-step. So I was mentioning the screening, that can be part of, it could be phone or video. Most of it is phone. I haven't seen many through Zoom, which is identical to a remote interview. And then depends on who's in charge. It's typically an HR recruiter, and his manager is the person that you'll hear from. And it's not the manager, like your supervisor. It would be someone that's completely separate. And so that's another thing too. A lot of future employees who are applying are trying to get a hold of their future supervisor when they don't know much about the position. So typically HR will have a lot more information about the job description, any deadlines and whatnot. So you'll hear from the manager, and then they'll ask general questions. Like I was mentioning before, it's typically salary limitations or the modality. And then, of course, when it comes to any background checks, that's always done before that you are hired, but they will take all that in and they will have references. Right after they interview, when they see you, they will call you references. So they'll ask for that in advance, just in case that they have that and they want to go to the next step. So in part 2, if they say, okay, you know the limitations, you understand that you're going to be coming to campus, or you're going to come to office 5 days a week, or you're not coming at all and it's just online, does that work for you? You're then invited to a part 2 of an interview, and that looks completely different for each industry. You have some that are over Zoom like this, depending on the position. You have some that are going to be in a group setting with other folks. some that might be you, but in a group of other folks interviewing you, of a panel. And then some are just the traditional, just you and another person in a room. So that is where you will get a different variation. I know in education for us, and in my roles at least, a lot of them were group panels. We had people interview me, but I had 4 or 5 of them ask questions one at a time. But then I've had, when it escalates to step 3 or step 4, it'll be just 1 or 2 people. So just depending on the industry. And Catherine can speak on her interview experiences if she has different ones.
No, similar to you. Yeah, there's usually the screening, which is a HR recruiter, and then the interview itself, couple rounds, sometimes 2 to 3 people, and then the final round usually is like with the top person, just a very one-on-one, making sure that you're an overall good.
Yeah. And honestly, once you make it to round 3, that's when you know they really like you, but they're just trying to figure out between you and another person who is a better fit, or you can be the only person and they just want to make sure that you go through all the steps. So you just really want to be your authentic self during that whole process. So going to step 3, that's another round, and that typically is with the, like Catherine was saying, the VP or the CEO or whoever your supervisor is going to be at the end of the day. And all these rounds are typically someone who's going to email you and call you. It's either or both. They'll call you sometimes just to confirm a date, and they'll say, okay, we're going to email you the details. I do like sending a confirmation that I received the email once I get that email. That way they know that I received it and I'm organized in that way and punctual. It just shows. And then even if, let's say, you've interviewed the first round, the second round, and the third round, anyone you spoke to, you should send a follow-up thank you, or I received the information, or whatnot. And it's that consistency of that punctuality will really help. Okay, so preparing for an interview, this is definitely crucial because it shows when you're actually being interviewed, and depending on the industry again, let's say you've been in your role and you're being promoted. And that's something that usually happens within the working professionals. Or let's say you are an entry-level adult coming from graduate school, and this is your first salary position. You definitely want to go on to their webpage of the role that you will be associated with, and at least familiarize yourself with the programs that you'll be in charge of or the departments that you'll be connecting with. And that helps them understand what you know and who you're going to be working with. And that way, when you are saying certain responses, you can highlight those people, their departments. That just shows that you've done your research. Same thing with your role. You're researching the company and how you fit within this company as far as what you're going to be doing for this company. And not only the current role, but maybe the things that you could do to help, the several interactions or several, other departments that are involved, depending on what's the industry that you're in. For example, if it's in education, I am going to go in and I'm going to look at different weaknesses that they have. And I'll say, okay, their website does not look very accurate, or it looks outdated. So I might mention, there are certain things that I would like to, that I observed on your website when I do interview, and they say, oh yeah, you've taken a look at our webpage and she's already identified things that she wants to improve on. That looks very proactive of you to recognize certain edits, but be careful on being too strong with that, just because you don't want to show them that, oh, I know it all. I'm coming in and I'm telling you now how to change things. So that's something that you want to be paying attention to. If you're being promoted, it is good to have that, because they want to see what change you're bringing, right? If I'm doing the same thing, it's just going to be stagnant. But if there's growth, then definitely show, I see this, you should have this done. I have seen this been done, but I think this needs to be done. So that way you have examples and improvements. Preparing questions, that is always a good idea. And I believe I do have them in the next slide as far as what questions to ask. And then practice out loud. That is something that I've actually done and it's been successful. I'll pull a list of just mock questions and I'll say, okay, this role has this identifiable population. I know I'm going to work with this type of student or even team, or these are the projects that I'm going to work on. So let me come prepared to talk about that, and I'll practice it out loud to myself. And if it makes sense, great. Then I keep doing that until I'm confident with my answers. And time yourself too, because that also helps you stay within the 1 or 2 minute of responding to a question. Again, depending on the field. So for the interview best practices, we just have a couple things for you. On the day of, please try to arrive early. At least for me personally, I like to arrive 30 to 45 minutes early, just to have a peace of mind. I know where they're located. I'm not going to be lost, especially if they gave you parking access and you're going to be parking and looking for a structure, and then you have to look for the actual location of the office. That might take a while. To go above and beyond, you can even go then the day before and look for the office and have a peace of mind before the day, just to sleep and know, okay, I know where I'm going to park and I know where I'm going to be. No problem at all if you have the luxury of actually driving there. And keep in mind, most of the time right now, a lot of the interviews are remote. So if this is a remote interview, you should be acing this interview because you should not be as nervous. Let's see. Yes, taking notes to capture important details. That is very important when you want to take down names of the individuals that interviewed you. When I walk in, I have a portfolio and we don't really have one to show you, but I guess I could show you this. It would look like a planner, but it would have a leather bind, and inside you can have just blank paper or lined paper. I know you can't see it because of my background, but if you come with some type of notepad, that way you can write who's in the room in order. And you can kind of write like a little art, or not art, but a diagram that knowing, okay, by order who's sitting, and you can address them by their name as you respond to questions. That way they know that you paid attention to their name. And if you can write their title, so you can remember, I'm going to the directory to find their email, so I can email them and say thank you after. So all that is for you to have that later on to say thank you. And when you're balancing your speaking and your listening, that's very important, because you don't want to keep telling them, oh, can you please repeat the question? You want to pay attention to what they're saying. And if it helps, you can even write down keywords of the questions that they're asking. And if it's a part 2 question, it's okay to ask, can I please hear the second question again? That's okay. They know that you're nervous, but if you can write those keywords down, it will help. And then as speaking, I tend to speak very quickly when I'm nervous or when I'm just at an interview. So keep in mind just to breathe. And one person told me before, if it helps, just keep both of your hands on your lap the whole time. It keeps you kind of somewhat balanced. Let's see. Keep responses between 30 seconds to 2 minutes. I do agree with that, just because depending on how many questions they have for you, they typically tell you at the beginning, oh, we have 6 to 9 questions or more. The most I've seen, to be honest, has been 9 to 10 questions. And the way they format it too is different. Some people will have the printed list of questions in front of you, actually, and you'll have them as you interview, and some will have them in front of them in the interview, and you just have to keep going until they stop. And some actually give you a whole agenda of what's going to happen, what they're going to do, and that's nice. So you have a heads up of how many questions you have and how much time you have. And then some, which is really cool, they have a complete third-party person present at the interview, just to have the legal aspect of it, that they ask you all the questions. the same way they asked to other candidates. So if you see that, do not panic. It's just to make it a formal way of making it fair. So if 2 minutes, I would say, is a good mark. If you have, 6 to 8 questions, that's a good way to have your time questions. And then body language, of course, you want to be confident. You don't want to keep moving. And I know I talk with my hands a lot. So try as much as you can to keep your hands on your lap and, have your back straight as much as you can. And looking them in the eye is also very important. If you are one of those individuals that's not happy with your current position and you're looking for a different position and they happen to now want to interview you, please do not mention anything bad about your current employer, especially if it's something negative that they're not supporting you in, and that's the reason why you're leaving. So I would try to rephrase that in a way where you could say, I've mastered, or I've become an expert in my current field, and I'm looking to advance in a different way, or challenge myself in a different way in a different industry. That could be how you can phrase it, or in a different department, I'm learning to gain a different skills. You could say that as well. And then just be enthusiastic. That's something that also everyone wants to see nowadays. After COVID, people want to see engagement. They want to see you're excited to come back to the office and engage with coworkers. And if it's students that you're working with, great. If it's patients or clients, great. They want to see that excitement. So as I was telling you during the interview, maintaining eye contact, being yourself, being authentic. You don't want to be this person who is definitely not who you are on a day-to-day basis. And again, that confidence is key. I'll tell you, I've interviewed different types of people, whether it was students or full-time staff. And the first thing I see is how they carry themselves. And if they are a confident individual, understands where they are in their career and where they want to be in your organization, and what they want to produce, you see that the minute they walk in when you ask, tell me about yourself. So that is something to notice when maybe you want to record yourself as you are practicing for interviews, to see your body language and how confident you sound when you are answering questions. And then leaving the interview, again, having those names to get back in touch with them, taking those next steps to know, okay, when am I going to hear back from them? So if they don't mention it in the interview itself, you can say, hey, so what would be when's the next time I'll hear from you? And that's totally fine to ask, because it's something that you're waiting on to hear back from. And then the time frame. So one thing I'll mention how to respond. I know we said it's a 2-minute response, so definitely keep it simple. But you also want to keep it in a strategic way. We call it the STAR method. And it's situation, task, action, and result. So if I am explaining to someone, if they ask me, let's say, how do you stay organized? That's a question that some people definitely will ask. I've been asked that sometimes. And they'll say, so the situation here, I can mention, well, how do I stay organized? I stay organized by, using my planner. I use my Google Calendar. I use my personal calendar. I even have my own personal list of reminders just in case I forget. And I ask, and then I go through this list, a situation. I can say, oh, well, the other day I was prepping for this interview, but I also had a big project to do. And I had another project that required my immediate attention that was due the next day. So I let them know the situation. Then I said the task that I was required to prepare for this project, and it was due the next day. So the action that I took, I prioritized it by using my planner. And I said, I'm going to take this task on first, this second, and then this third. And then I even put a reminder on my phone just in case I forget that I need to do something at home due to other personal chores. That way I don't forget. Then the result was I was able to get all these done in a timely manner. And in addition to that, I was able to finalize a report that was due the next week. And that shows them, and I said this in almost 2 minutes now, and it shows them step-by-step result of how I think and how I took action upon every thought. So the STAR method does help. I will mention, if you just say just to say, you want to have an example to back up what you're saying, especially if it's an industry where it's all about, I need you to do is action oriented, or it's very fast paced, then they'll need to see how you stay organized and on top of it. So that will be how you incorporate the STAR method. And the questions I was telling you that to ask them. So a lot of folks tend to shy away from this. And we do encourage you to ask questions because it shows that you have interest in them just as much as they have interest in you. These are just some examples of questions to ask. So what challenges is your company facing? I do like that. It just shows that they can speak on their weaknesses and still be able to be vulnerable in a way with you, right? Because that takes a lot of courage for them to mention that with you. And if they do mention it, that's an opportunity for you to respond with, well, luckily I have experience in so and so that you need, I can bring that to the table. They're like, oh, we didn't know that. And then the second question, what type of growth do you see in the organization in the next 5 years? That's huge. If you see that they don't know, they don't have an idea, that shows you that they don't really have a kind of futuristic plan. They might not be as organized as you think. So that goes back to, again, your goals for the type of organization that you want to work for. The third question, what social issues does your company support? That goes back to political views. If there's something that you feel strongly about, even if you work for a Christian school, that's something that you might want to ask if there's something that they fully support. That's something that you're curious about, why not? How does your organization define and promote diversity? Another good question to ask if that's something that you're passionate about. Or the other one, what steps do you take to ensure the increase of diverse representation, and what steps do you take? And that can be typically within someone who's, let's say, getting promoted and happen to be a female, and it is a industry full of men, and she wants to ensure that there are levels and there are opportunities for her to be promoted. So she will ask those questions. And that's where you might want to ask that question to see if they care about professional development for that, diverse representation and whatnot. How does the company promote professional growth? That's kind of aligns with the last one. But for those of you who are recent graduates, you want someone who's going to continuously pour into your professional resume, who's going to share conferences, it's going to share mentorship opportunities, or connect you with someone that they know. So you definitely want to have professional growth incorporated in your role. And the last one is the culture of the office or the team that you're going to work with. That's another one. If you feel like you're one of those who is not happy right now with where they're working, then that's going to be a question that's going to matter to you. Am I going to be happy in my next role? So going into, so kind of transition from cover letters to interviews, we want to talk a little bit about how to look for a job. If some of you are don't have one, or you're looking for a completely different career change, this is how you can look for that position. So let me just play this video and then we'll go from there.
So, you know how to search for jobs online. What you might not know is that there are ways to make it even easier. These search hacks can help you find exactly what you're looking for on Indeed. The first step is a hard one. Close all the memes and cat videos. Then, in Indeed's What search box, search for a specific job title in quotation marks. You don't want the search engine to surface jobs with only one of the words. Take it a step further by specifying the company you want to work at and words you want to exclude from the search. Now, what if you've got an ideal salary or even a distance from home in mind? Or maybe you're part-time. Advanced Job Search is here to help.
Hey, pumpernickel bagel?
Oh, in a minute, Fred. Where was I? If you feel like taking a break, you can save your searches and set up job alerts. You'll be among the first to hear about a new job, and your application is more likely to be seen by an employer if you apply right after the job is posted. Neat, eh? Well, I think that's everything. Remember that the smallest moves are sometimes the smartest. Like and subscribe. So, you know how to.
So she kind of touched base off of some things, and that was actually something that I didn't know, and I tested it today, and it did work. So if you do put them in those quotation marks, the specific title that you're looking for, and then you put and then you put hiring, that works. Or if you just put the job title, and you can put the school name or the name of the company, that might also work. And that's specifically on LinkedIn and Indeed. I saw those two that worked. So try that out and see if that gives you a specific search. But there are several platforms that you can look for jobs on. It really depends on the industry that you're looking for. So we do want to touch base off of kind of where you can start off. I would say education, there's many platforms there, depending, are you in high school? Are you going to be with college students? And then I will mention every company has their career website. You can just log in and see what available opportunities they have. So you can just apply there versus going to the third-party platforms to apply. And then, of course, companies like Indeed and LinkedIn, those are technically third parties, but you might find them more updated compared to other platforms that are used, especially LinkedIn. And we will have a series about LinkedIn, so I won't touch base too much about that. But the hiring manager one is another effective way to connect really with a person who might be in charge of making that final decision. I know when I was looking for positions, connecting with the chair or the director of the department saying, hey, I just applied for the position, or I'm wanting to apply for the position, but I want more information. Would you be okay if I interviewed you for 45 minutes or so just to learn more? And if they answer back, awesome. So that's another opportunity to kind of stand out. So kind of we're concluding our first webinar. We have covered the resumes, the cover letters, and a little bit more about interviews for you. So thank you for being here. I know we have a few more announcements to make right after our evaluation here. We have a couple series coming up actually. So if you do have your calendar handy, I want to post some dates for you that we will be having our next series. But before I do that, I do want to thank Catherine from the Coptic Education Foundation for being here and for really sharing her knowledge and her expertise. We are both available to you to support, to counsel you. I believe it's on the next slide, but before we go on the next slide, please take some time just to scan this for evaluation, and we will be sending this to you as well in an email. Okay. And this is the ACTS information. If you have any question about ACTS, we are currently in our spring 2024 term. And if you are interested to study at ACTS, or if you're current, awesome, that's welcome. But if you are not an ACTS student, our summer is coming up. So take a look on our website. We do have our dates up for summer, and I work with their admissions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. All right, and then we have CF. Catherine, if you want to talk about CF.
Yeah, if you have any questions or want to connect thereafter, feel free to email us at info@copticedu.com. You could also email me directly. I'll just drop my email in the chat. It is just catherine@copticedu.org. If you have any questions or anything, and yeah, if anyone does have any questions, happy to take them right now too.
And I believe we had a flyer. Give me 1 second. Let me stop sharing here. There we go. So our next webinar will be with His Grace Carlos, and the topic will be how to understand and utilize your spiritual gifts. So we'll be sending more information on our database of anyone who's RSVP'd previously. And of course, we'll be on our social media, Instagram and LinkedIn. But if you're an ACT student, this is all access to you, and you'll have the recording. Even if you RSVP today, you'll be getting this recording, and you'll have this on we'll have it on our webpage as well. Yeah, so this will be for next one, and that's going to be on April 11th at 6 p.m. So that's a Thursday via Zoom. And our next one after that will be in May with our very own David Musa, and it's going to be about LinkedIn and networking. So he's on our call here today. So he will be presenting for that series. All right, any questions? I'm going to stop sharing here to take your questions. I know we shared a lot, and we have all three of us here. So any questions?
I did have a brief question. It kind of goes a little bit more with the LinkedIn, but maybe I'll just pose it, and if you want to address it later, that's fine too. But how do you feel, or what would be your advice on replying to recruiters? So I'm in a current position. I've been in the industry now for about 10 years, and I get solicited a lot. And some of them are very legit. I just, from being in the industry, I know the positions that they're referring to. Is it necessary to respond even if I'm not currently interested or looking, or what would be your advice to that?
David, do you want to take that on?
Sure. I mean, my advice is it's always good to have a connection. It's always good to have somebody just in case. So I worked in talent acquisition for over 10 years. And for me, a lot of the individuals I did hire weren't interested at the time I reached out, but ended up reaching out to me at a later time. I ended up checking in with them maybe 6 months later. So it's always good to have that connection and have that person there. Now, and we can always talk offline about this, but there are sometimes if the recruiter is working for that actual company, that's phenomenal. If that recruiter does work for like a third party or a recruiting agency, then it might not be as fruitful. But overall, I think it's really good to always have those connections because you never know what's going to happen down the line, whether that's the next few months, the next year, they might have a position that really sticks out to you. So I would highly recommend just to have a quick conversation with them, just so get to know them, and then later on, you never know what happens.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Good question, Rebecca. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. We'll be sending you the recording. And if you want to make appointments with CF, we'll definitely be here to help you.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Andy, awesome job.
Thank you.
That was great. That was phenomenal. I think that was super valuable, and I really hope a lot of people got a lot of information because that was a fantastic presentation.
I appreciate you so much, David. Thank you so much. I will send the
Of
recording
course.
very soon.
Okay, awesome. Let me know if you need anything.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right, bye.
Bye. I don't know if he can hear me.